Welcome to tonight's Tanya class. We are studying Perek Lamed Daled, chapter 34 in Tanya. So starting in chapter 26, the Alter Rebbe started on a journey of the idea of Simcha. But let me just actually begin by saying tonight's class we're dedicating to a speedy recovery, hopefully a miracle for Avram ben Ida and Liba bat Bechia. Okay, so back. So in chapter 26, the Alter Rebbe spoke at length about the idea that we have to be b'simcha. If you want to be effective in life, you got to be happy. If you're happy, you can do anything. God forbid, if you're not happy, everything becomes a struggle. He spoke about it in chapter 26, 27, 28, 29, and 30. He spoke about what happens if a person is, totally like not in a good place. So he talks about the idea that's coming from your animal soul, and that we have to obviously deal with the animal soul to try to get it out of the way. Going on in chapter 31, he speaks that even though you deal with the animal soul, you have to oppress it a little bit. Nevertheless, a person should still be happy because of your godly soul. Chapter 32, he went on to speak about that through the fact that a person's happy, you will have great relationships, which obviously is great. Chapter 33, which we discussed last week, the Alter Rebbe discussed that a key way to achieve great simcha, great joy, is by something which is called Achdut Hashem, which is the idea of the unity and oneness of God, the fact that God is one. What do you mean one? Not that one versus two. The only real existence in the world that exists is God. And when a person is aware and conscious about the fact that God is the only thing that exists, guess what happens? You're happy. Why? Because wherever you are, God's with you. And by you creating that awareness in your life, you're actually giving God a sense of joy and satisfaction. So it's a double reason to be happy, because you're making God's presence felt in a real way in this world. That's basically last week's chapter. This week the author introduces a second level of Achdus Hashem, and he explains like this. This that we spoke about last week, about the idea of oneness of God. So what is the idea of oneness of God? We believe that God is everything, God is in everywhere, and so our connection to that Achdus Hashem is based on emunah, based on faith. What's the issue with the problem with faith? The problem with faith is that it's all-encompassing and it's not necessarily always internalized. So this week the Alter introduces a whole new concept of Achdus Hashem, an important concept, that Achdus Hashem could be actually internalized in our lives. And the Alter begins with a little piece of history, and he starts as follows. And he says that we know that the first Jewish person was who? Was Abraham. Abraham. Now we had not only Abraham, we had the three patriarchs, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And in the world of Kabbalah, there's a name for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The regular name is their forefathers. What's the Kabbalistic name for the forefathers? They're called the Merkavah. What is a Merkavah? A Merkavah is a chariot. Now, why are they called a chariot? It's like, calling someone a chariot. Why are they a chariot? Because what's a chariot? A chariot basically does not have any will, mind, feelings of its own. A chariot is, you plug him onto the horse, and he's ready to go. He does whatever he's supposed to do. So in other words, the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are like the chariot, means that they had no will of their own. They had no mind of their own, even though they had a will and they had a mind, but the point was they were able to totally put their will and their mind and their ideas and their thoughts and their feelings just to do one thing, to bring God and godliness down to this world. So on one hand, I mean, it's obviously a powerful, it's not an easy thing to do, because you're letting go of your will and your intellect and your mind and your feelings. I mean, literally, even though you were gifted with these things, you're letting it all go. But on the other hand, if you think about it, it happens to be once you do it, life is very easy. Life is very easy, because what do you need to do? Whatever God wants. What do you think? Whatever God wants me to think. I'm ready. And so you take yourself out of the equation. You take the big I out of the equation. You take the ego out of the equation. Once you take the ego out of the equation, life is simple. Who do you think makes all the problems? We do. Our I and our ego. If we're able to get our I and our ego out of the way, life is very simple. Decisions are very easy to make. A lot of times it's hard to make decisions. But when the decision is very simple, what does God want me to do right now? I do it. You don't have to say, oh, I should have done that, I should have been here, I should have gone there, and you're like always second guessing yourself and you're not sure of yourself and it affects your self-esteem. When a person is on the level of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, where you're the chariot, take me wherever you want. Wherever I'm needed, that's where I am. You need me here, I'm here now. You need me there, I'm there now. I'm not confused, I'm not torn. Wherever I'm needed most and wherever I'm needed best, that's where I am. Now that is, again, you're giving up, it might look like, on a superficial level, you're giving up your freedom, your ideas, but you're actually getting the biggest gift because you are now a chariot for God's will. And once you're a chariot for God's will, you don't think you're in the right place? You don't think you're doing the right thing? For sure you're doing the right thing. You're doing what God wants you to do. So that is basically what Abraham and Isaac and Jacob are called in the world of Kabbalah. They were a chariot for God. Meaning to say is, whatever God wanted. What does that mean practically in our class? That means they were a chariot for the oneness of God. Because when you say whatever God wants, I'm ready to do, what are you affirming? The only one and real exclusive existence that exists is what? God. God's will, God's ideas, God's feelings. So that and oneness goes hand in hand. That was the life of the patriarchs. Let's move forward. Then you had prophets. The prophets operated the same way. They basically, whatever God said, that's what they shared. They didn't share their own thoughts, their own ideas, their own feelings. Whatever God said, they shared. Think about it. What is a prophet called? A Navi. What does a prophet mean? He prophesizes whatever God says. He didn't come and give a nice speech, a nice joke, a nice entertainment. It wasn't about him. He was basically a vehicle for God. Then you have, as we know, the elitist, not in a negative way, God forbid, elitist, but the elitist and the prophets. Who was considered the greatest prophet? Moses. Why? Because Moses basically saw God face to face, and as the expression is, Shechina, which refers to the presence and the power of God, medaberet mitoch grono, comes out automatically from Moses' throat. It means whatever God says, it just comes out. It's like passive. It's not an active involvement. It's a strictly passively going through Moses. So the patriarchs, the prophets, Moses all had one thing in common. What did they have in common? They were a chariot. For what? For the oneness of God. That is the patriarchs, the prophets, and Moses. What happened to the Jewish people? So it says that when God gave the Torah at Mount Sinai, so the Jewish people were elevated to that level. They were able to see and feel the oneness of God. They didn't see walls. They didn't see tables. Not that they had walls and tables at Mount Sinai, but they didn't see anything physical. What they saw was the oneness of God. They experienced it. And actually God came down to the mountain and started to say the Ten Commandments. Now what happened to the Jewish people when God started to share the Ten Commandments? Their souls left their body. Why did their souls leave the body? Because they couldn't handle that oneness. The patriarchs were totally humble for God. The prophets, Moses, they had true humility and they were able to handle it. The Jewish people, when they experienced a drop of it at Mount Sinai, their souls left the body. They couldn't handle that oneness of God. So it was a big dilemma, a big problem. On one hand, they wanted to be one with God. On the other hand, every time they basically became this oneness of God, they were totally like their souls were leaving the body. They were dying. So God said, guess what? We have to create some kind of vehicle that the Jewish people could experience the oneness of God. Because life in this world, as we're studying this week and last week, is a life that we're supposed to be happy. And happy to what level? To the highest possible level of happiness. And the highest possible level of happiness comes when? When you're one with God. There you go. Now, if when you're one with God, you start fainting, it's not going to work. So God had to create a vehicle that we can be one with God, but then again, our soul wouldn't leave our body. So what was that vehicle that God created that we're one with God and our soul won't leave our body? He went ahead and said, guess what? We're going to make a Mishkan. What is a Mishkan? So we know you have the Bet HaMikdash, which is the permanent temple in Jerusalem. And then you had, before that, you had something which is called a Mishkan, which is a moving temple. It's like a house and a RV. right? A house is a permanent house. An RV is the one that you drive around. So the permanent temple is the one in the Bet HaMikdash in Jerusalem. We had two of them, and God willing we'll have the third when the Messiah comes. And then you have the tabernacle that the Jewish people traveled with. It's referred to as a tabernacle of Shiloh because it spent most of the years in Shiloh. Matter of fact, you go today, you'll see they have like a little synagogue, which is a little, the shape, the roof is a little like that. But anyway, that's a side note. But the point is, so God said, I'm commanding you to build a Mishkan. Mishkan means, again, a tabernacle, but the literal translation Mishkan means Sheikhim, where God could dwell in there. God's infinite power can dwell in there. And they had the sacrifices, and you had lighting the menorah, and the showbread, and all these, what took place in the tabernacle. But what was the purpose of the Mishkan? So when you come to the Mishkan, you can see, oh my gosh, you literally saw godliness. Because as we know, there's a lot of miracles that took place in the Mishkan. Many, many miracles is listed in Mishnah, in the Mishnayot. A lot of miracles that took place every single day in the Mishkan and the Beit HaMikdash. So when you came there, you saw, oh my gosh, now you saw this like the oneness of God. So by creating that, so how did they connect to the oneness of God? By this Mishkan, by a physical entity that God created. Through that, they're able to achieve, to experience the oneness of God. Now, so the reality is, anytime you want to experience the oneness of God, since if we experience it totally like the patriarchs or the prophets or Moses, our soul would leave our body. So God had to create what? A vehicle. He gave us a gift, the Mishkan. And then after the Mishkan era was over, what did we have? We had the Beit HaMikdash. We had the Beit HaMikdash. So now, here's the question. Today, we know we don't have the Mishkan. We don't have the Beit HaMikdash, at least in the revealed way, until the Messiah comes. So how are we going to connect to this oneness of God? So guess what? From when the temple was destroyed, anytime a person, a Jew, studies Jewish law and follows Jewish law, you are experiencing that oneness of God just like in the temple. So you can experience, how can you experience the oneness of God? By studying Torah, specifically in the area of halakha, but anytime you study Torah, you're experiencing the oneness of God. Because right now you're sitting down, you're a human being, and yes, you don't see the oneness of God, otherwise you would like totally flip out, you know, like we did at Mount Sinai. But just like we went to the Mishkan, we experienced the oneness of God. Today, we can take out some Jewish law, we can take Mishnah, Talmud, Chumash, and we study, guess what? We are at that moment experiencing the oneness of God. So we have the power today to do that. When we do that, when we sit and study Torah, so you just took a moment which was, let's call it neutral, there was nothing going on, and you pulled out a holy book, and you started to study. You know what you did right now? When someone walks in, or for yourself, what do you see? You see God. You see the oneness of God. Because I could have done something, God forbid, terrible, or I could do nothing. So terrible, nothing, the common denominator, it's not God or godly. Versus if I sit down and say, you know, this time, God gave me time as a gift, and I'm going to spend this time in this place, I'm going to sit and study Torah right now. So right now, what am I doing? Why am I studying Torah? Because I want to connect with oneness of God. So as I study Torah, you know what I'm experiencing? The oneness of God. And once you experience the oneness of God, now it's a whole different reality. Now the oneness of God is kicking in. And as the oneness of God kicks in, you know what happens? You start being happy. Happy in a real way. Why are you happy? Because you are making a dwelling place for God right now where you're at. So, therefore, when I sit down and study Torah, and we know there's in terms of studying Torah, we have a minimum obligation to study at least a chapter in the morning and a chapter in the evening. It means, let's say for example, you're busy, irrelevant what, whether you're taking care of your family or you have to work to earn a livelihood, whatever you're involved in, but as busy as you are, there's no exemption from, I'm talking in the world of Torah study, I'm not talking about other mitzvot, there's no exemption from not taking out time in the morning, when you get up, and time in the evening to sit down and study a little bit. A little bit could be 3 minutes, 5 minutes, a little Mishnah, some Talmud or some Chumash, a little bit in the morning, a little in the evening. That's a mandatory, that's a must. Obviously, if you have time to study more, you can study 24 hours a day. Because the biblical obligation to study Torah is really when? 24/7. You have exemptions to pray and to eat and to earn a livelihood and to, be involved in the community project and so on and so forth. But the point is that the biblical obligation is a minimum, at least something in the morning, something in the evening, and again, the maximum is infinite. So when a person studies Torah, you know what happens then? Wow, you're experiencing the oneness of God. When you experience the oneness of God, what happens?
You're happy.
You're happy. Now, here the Alter Rebbe says that's a major difference than the previous chapter. In the previous chapter, it's more about faith. Okay, you have faith in the oneness of God, and that's great. But how's that internalized? Here, when you're actually sitting down and when you study, you have to say the words. You have to say it out loud. And you're saying the words, and you're listening to what you're saying. You are actually drawing God down in you in an internal way, and that joy is much more powerful, much more potent, and much more internalized, and much more lasting within you. And that will give you the net result of what? True simcha, true joy. So the Alter Rebbe asks a simple question. He says, okay, I got it. When I study Torah, I'm bringing godliness into me. And now I feel the oneness of God. Because why are you studying Torah? If you don't believe in God, why are you studying Torah? Obviously you believe in God, and you're studying God's Torah. And when you study Torah, you're studying God's Torah. So now you're part of the oneness of God, and now you're happy. So the Alter asks a simple question, but the obligation to study Torah is what? A chapter in the morning, a chapter in the evening. And let's say, for example, you're busy, whether you're married and you have kids and you have a family and you have a job and you have a community, you have other obligations, and you can barely do the minimum. So that helps you to feel the oneness of God when, let's say for a half hour in the morning and a half hour in the evening. So out of 24 hours, you have a half hour in the morning, a half hour in the evening, which is 1 hour, which is not even 5% of your time, and that 5% you're experiencing the oneness of God. So in that 5% you're going to feel joy. How are you going to feel joy the rest of the 24 hours? More than 95% of your day. How are you going to feel the joy the rest of the day? Because what we say, the way to achieve joy is by what? By oneness of God. Oneness of God comes through studying Torah. But if you're studying Torah only for a half hour in the morning, half hour at night, how are you going to achieve the oneness of God? So the Alter Rebbe says very simple. You are studying Torah for a half hour in the morning, half hour at night. Why? Because you're trying to get away with the smallest amount? No, I'm busy. Whether family, community, work, whatever, obligations you have. But let's say you didn't have all those obligations. Would you study Torah 24/7? Absolutely. You have something else better to do? I mean, I don't mean something else better to do, and therefore you're doing that. There's nothing greater. There's nothing greater that one can do other than connect with the oneness of God. And if I can do it through study, and the best way to do it is through study Torah. So therefore, if I had 100% any free moment I had, you know what I'd be doing? I'd be studying Torah. Now, that means if I didn't have any obligations, no family obligations, no financial obligations. Let's say, for example, I got the manna came into my bank account every day. I didn't have to go out and look for a job, and all other responsibilities happen and things happen on its own. So what would happen? I wouldn't have to go ahead and sit and study Torah. Hi, welcome. Come, have a seat. I wouldn't have to say, I wouldn't have to do other stuff. I would sit and study Torah 24/7. So the truth is, the reason why I'm studying Torah only for a half hour in the morning, half an hour at night is why. Because that's all I have, the time. But the truth is what I would study when? 24/7. So the Alter Rebbe says, so since you would study Torah 24/7, and that's really your intention, so we have a rule in Judaism, which is a very, very important rule, and it's a good rule to know, that machshava toiva, if somebody has a good thought, and let's say, for example, this case. He had a thought. He wants to really study 24/7, but nothing. He has to go to work, and he has to take care of this for his family, and he has to do this for his community, and this obligation, he has to do this mitzvah, right? But bottom line, he didn't get around to it, but he really wants to study 24/7. So even though you didn't study 24/7, you just studied Torah for a half an hour, guess what? It's considered as what? As if you study Torah 24 hours a day. Wow. We're giving you credit as if you did it just for the thought. Think about this. Think about this again. So when you get up in the morning and say, really I want to study Torah all day. But God, I'm not putting you on hold. I got to go to work, right? And I got to go spend time with the family. And I got to do some other obligations. But really I would study. The minute I have a free minute, Night comes, a half hour. You know what? I would study now for the next 20 hours. But I got to go to sleep. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. Tomorrow I have to get up early, right? Etc. But really, your intention is, and you're not playing shtick. It's not a shtick, and it's not a game, and it's not a con. You really would love to study 24/7. God, if you sent the money in my bank account, I don't have to work, right? If you took care of my family by robotic, I don't have to take care of my chores and my errands, etc. And if you took care of everything else, guess what? I would study Torah. And I'm being sincere. I'm making a deal with you, God. Send in the money, wire in the money to my account. I don't have to work. That's right away 9 to 5 and then some, right? So in other words, since your machshava, since your thought is good, which is I want to study Torah, God considers it if you're studying Torah 24/7. Now, even though technically, how long are you studying Torah for?
1 hour a day.
An hour a day. But really, do I want to study 24 hours a day? 24 hours? Absolutely. I'm technically not able to. But because I want to, and I really sincerely want to, and the proof is, take for example Sunday, my day off, I sit and study Torah. I don't sit and read newspapers and watch TV and play on the internet or go on WhatsApp and all these emails, right? I don't spend my time with nothing. I actually sit and study Torah. That's the proof. So God considers it that you studying Torah when? 24 hours a day. So therefore, if it's considered that you're studying Torah 24 hours a day, what happens now? You are connected with the oneness of God 24 hours a day. And maybe in reality you're not studying right now, but you would want to. So God considers if you're studying, and since if you're studying Torah, you're connected to the oneness of God, because that's really where your mind is. Think about it. That's where your really heart is. That's where your mind is. And you sincerely would love to do it. You just technically don't have the time. So guess what? Simcha's automatic. When? 24 hours a day. So again, even though you're studying Torah for the time that you're able to, whether it's a half hour in the morning, half hour at night, or if it's 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever the amount is, but the other time you really want to study Torah, so you're plugged in with the oneness of God 24 hours a day. And therefore you experience what? Simcha all the time. Because again, Simcha is a byproduct of unity. Unity I have. How do I have it? In a real way, by studying. And the rest of the day I'm not studying, it's really I do want to study, I just don't have, I'm not able to. And God considers if I'm studying Torah. Can you imagine? God's pretty good. He's giving you credits for stuff that you're not doing.
Deal.
Huh?
Great deal.
Who does that for you? Can you imagine you say to your boss, listen, I wanted to come to work this week. I wasn't able to, but listen, I wanted to. Give me a paycheck. That's not going too far, right? But God's paying you. God's giving you simcha.
God opens up a bank.
There you go. He has a bank. The bank is open.
The bank of Torah.
Study Torah and say, listen, the rest of the day you want to be able to study Torah, just you got to go to work. Guess what? He pays. God pays on the thought. Nobody, I don't think anyone in the world pays on thought. Who pays? I don't know of anyone. Like you said, let's find that bank, right?
Find that bank, I'm in.
We're in. Okay. So that's one option. How through a person really sincerely thinks that he wants to study 24/7, he will get credit for it. That's one option. Another option the Alter Rebbe says how it affects you 24 hours a day, even though you're not studying the whole time. He says very simple. Because what happens, what is a person doing the rest of the time? Most of the time you're working hard. You're trying to earn a living. Now, let's say 9 to 5, you're working 8 hours a day, or some people work 10 hours, and you work 4, whatever the amount of time a day you're working, and you earn a paycheck. And you work a whole week, or whether you get paid every week, or every 2 weeks, or once a month, however you get paid. Now, the reality is, what do? Everyone, we have a biblical obligation to give tithing. Tithing means whatever the amount I made, whatever the X is, you take 10% of that, 10% you give to charity. Now, why are you giving 10% to charity? Or you can give up to 20%. Because that's what it says in the Torah. 10% or up to 20% you can give. You shouldn't really give more than 20% unless it's unique circumstances. So you give away 10% or even up to 20%. Now when a person gives away that money, so what happens is, when you give that to charity, so how do you earn your money? When you worked, do you just like passively sit at work, or you're like really into it? Everything's into it. All cylinders, as we say, are working. Your mind, your heart, your emotions are working, and that's how people succeed in business. So you're working fully. What happens? You worked fully, so as a reward for your work, whether a boss gives it to you or you're self-employed and you create a profit, so you earn the paycheck. In that paycheck, even though it's money, what's in that paycheck? That's a reward for all your work. You worked pretty hard to get that basket of shekels, dollars. Not appreciating, that's your work is in there. That's your work. Your work produced that. when you go ahead and give 10% of that, whatever the dollar amount, to charity, what are you giving? Think about it. You're giving everything of you. You're giving your mind that you put into the work, your heart and your passion, you put everything into it. So when a person gives that to charity, you're not only elevating the time of work, let's say for 10% of your work, but since 10% or 20% is the required amount of charity, it elevates not only the 10% of your workday, but it elevates 100% of your workday. So since when you give charity, it elevates not only the 10% of your workday, but it actually elevates, since that's the allotted amount for charity, it elevates your whole workday. So therefore, you created a oneness in your work. Because why are you working? You're working so you can earn a living. And when you earn a living and you give away 10% tithing, you actually kosherized all the money that you earned, which basically means you elevated your full day's work. You elevated your whole day's work. But what does it mean you elevated the whole day's work? You basically made it clear that God runs the world, and because God runs the world, even though I would rather keep the 10% or 20%, so it's more for me, but I'm saying no, I'm giving away 10% and 20%. I agree that God runs the world. You're establishing the oneness of God. So now you establish it not only for the time that you work, that you're giving the 10% of it, actually affects your whole day of work, and therefore you can experience Achdus Hashem, which will bring you about true simcha. That's the second idea the Alter Rebbe discusses. The third idea the Alter Rebbe says is very simple. When a person studies Torah, as we said before, for the minimum that he's able to, whether it's a half hour, an hour, 2 hours, whatever time you're left with to study Torah in the day, because the rest of the day you're busy doing important things, we hope. So when you're studying Torah at that moment, so even though at that moment you experience Achdus Hashem, and you're going to say, hey, for the rest 23 or 22 hours a day I'm not experiencing it, the answer is no. Because when you study Torah that hour, that half hour, that 2 hours, that half hour, an hour has the power to elevate the whole day. In the sense that the Achdus Hashem is felt throughout the whole day, the oneness and unity of God is felt throughout the whole day, and that will bring you simcha throughout the whole day. So it's, in other words, it has a residual effect. It's not like while you're studying Torah, it's oneness of God, and therefore you're happy. No. While you're studying Torah, it's the oneness of God, and you're happy, but it spills over into the rest of your day. So whatever you're able to, and as long as you maximize the time that you're able to study Torah, it has an effect for then, and it has effect for afterwards. Now, so what does the Alter Rebbe bring out so far from this chapter of Tanya, chapter Lamed Dalet, chapter 34? That when a person studies Torah, or when a person studies Torah, and which basically creates the reality that a real reality is what? The oneness of God. That will bring him true joy in a very, very powerful way. So, what happens now? Throughout the day, you're filled with joy. But the Alter Rebbe says, but hold on a second. There are certain issues, since we're not perfect, we're not angels, we have certain issues that we need to still resolve, certain struggles that we have, and the fact is, sometimes we're not inspired. And the Alter Rebbe says, here, an important point is that it's not a contradiction. You can work on both things at the same time. You can focus on the fact that God is one, and by studying Torah, God's one becomes real, and is real in your life, and through that you have real simcha. But at the same time, you can take a look at your life, and you can say, in certain areas I'm really not necessarily one with God. And in certain areas I'm not necessarily 100% inspired. And what I would like to do is, I would like to work on that. And you can do some soul searching. You can be even a little bitter about it. And you can literally have both experiences at the same time. As he quotes from the Zohar, that you can have one side of your heart is happy, and one side of your heart is a little sad. Not depressed, God forbid. Why? Because things aren't working the way it's supposed to. And it's not a contradiction. It's not a contradiction. Why? Because from your soul, you're happy because I'm one with God. But on the other hand, from my animal soul, I'm not happy the way with its performance. I'm not happy that it's not excited, to study Torah and do mitzvot and pray, etc., etc. And once a person realizes that you can do both, so you should do both. And it's not a contradiction, because you're not leaving things, so to speak, unkempt or undealt with. You're addressing the issues that have to be addressed, but more importantly, you're addressing the most important issue, and the most important issue, as the Alter Rebbe says, is to make sure a person is always happy, because happiness is key to serve God, and the key way to serve God is obviously through the oneness of God, and the novel idea the Alter Rebbe introduces in this chapter of Tanya, that when we study Torah, we are connected to the oneness of God, and even for the time that we don't necessarily study Torah, but since we want to, we really want to, we just say, listen, I would love to study more. My passion is to study Torah, because I'm connected to God, and the way to connect to God is obviously through Torah study, and if I'm willing to study Torah when? 24/7. Just give me the ability, I'll study more Torah. Guess what? You will get credit for all that. You'll experience the oneness of God. And when you experience the oneness of God, you will experience the most fabulous and greatest simcha and joy that will be internalized in your life, and you'll be so happy, and life will be so great and so blessed.